We have a very special guest to EM Quick Hits, Dr. Hani Stoklosa, EM Doc at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, Executive Director of HEAL Trafficking, and Director of the Global Women's Health Fellowship at Mary Horrigan Connors Center for Women's Health and Gender Biology. She's a world expert on human trafficking and is going to give us some tools to help us recognize and manage this widespread and under-recognized problem in EM.
We know now that the emergency department is the front lines for caring for trafficked persons, and that the majority of trafficked persons access healthcare at some point while they're being trafficked. So this is definitely an issue that you are going to see in your emergency department and likely have been seeing, but have not been identifying as such. I think the key is to start with the definition, because it's actually much broader than a lot of people realize. So going to the international definition for trafficking, of course, it's a crime, so it's defined on the behalf of what the trafficker is doing to our patient or a potential victim. But there are three main components of what trafficking is. So the trafficker has to do something. There's an action, and then a means, and the purpose. And so just to go through those things, the trafficker may be involved at any stage of that person's exploitation. They may be recruiting them, they may be harboring them, they may be transporting them. They have to exploit them in some way and trap that victim in some way. So traffickers will use force, fraud, or coercion. We see that can be a variety of things, from what kind of the more obvious side of things, whether that's physical or sexual assault, or the more kind of psychologically coercive and equally powerful coercion using economic abuse, a debt bondage situation, and just similar to what we see with intimate partner violence, making them feel like a mental prisoner by really threatening them, threatening their families, alternating acts of violence with kindness. So those are the force, fraud, or coercion examples. And then for labor or sex trafficking, so the two main buckets of trafficking that we see internationally, labor trafficking is more common, and then traffickers are profiting off of those individuals. So at the core, trafficking is a crime against an individual where that person becomes a commodity, and the trafficker is using them for their own profit and gain. And what we see in the healthcare setting is that because of the ways that people are trapped in their situations, they can really present with a variety of medical complaints, whether that's a suicidal ideation, whether that's substance use that led to their trafficking and is keeping them trapped in that situation, whether it's tuberculosis from the living conditions where they're living with a number of individuals in close quarters. And as clinicians, we are, and emergency clinicians in particular, we are perfectly positioned and trained to identify trafficking because we've been trained to look for child abuse, we've been trained to look for domestic abuse, and a lot of those same sort of patterns that we've been trained in really can help us in identifying trafficking victims. So the history really not matching what we're seeing on physical exam or with our diagnostic studies, somebody that seems to be a bit more fearful than we would imagine for what they're presenting with. Delayed presentation. So traffickers sometimes won't let somebody access healthcare until they're really on death's door, because again, their whole purpose is to create profit for that trafficker. So something as simple as, a skin infection may present in a really delayed fashion. Another thing that I want to add in here is that we know that emergency physicians and clinicians, we all have biases. We are human. And, studies show that clinicians' unconscious biases are very similar to what we see in the general population. And that really comes to bear when it comes to trafficking. So, even for those of you that are listening in today, knowing this is a trafficking podcast, you may have come in to this podcast imagining what a victim of trafficking looked like. And we know that those biases, those stereotypes that we use are really helpful on one hand in our clinical work, but they can also be harmful in particular with trafficking, because my guess is that the trafficking victims that you will encounter may not meet those stereotypes, that image that you have in your mind. So to really check ourselves and our biases when we think about first what a trafficking victim looks like, and also how they behave, and realize that may be much broader than we originally thought. So I'm going to transition then to just talking briefly about how to assess somebody that you think is potentially trafficked. First of all, I do not advocate for 100% universal screening for trafficking. I think that that's too burdensome to our systems. And what we see with kind of universal screening for things a lot of times is that we as clinicians go into autopilot mode, and the human element and human compassion and empathy is so important when it comes to assessing for trafficking, that we really need to not be in kind of that automatic mode. So when I think about the who, in terms of who I would assess for trafficking, I think about vulnerable populations. So I think about my patients that are speaking English as a second language, those that are working in sectors that I would be worried about trafficking for. So traffickers exploit in underregulated, underpaid industries like agriculture, construction work, manufacturing, health and beauty services, domestic work, hospitality services. Migrants are vulnerable to trafficking substance users. So we're seeing huge links with the opioid epidemic and trafficking. And so that's a population that I definitely have a higher suspicion for trafficking in. And those that are involved in the child welfare system, homeless, runaway or throwaway youth, LGBTQ youth. And then when it comes to assessing for trafficking, I like to use this tool called the PAIR tool. And PAIR stands for privacy, educate, ask, respect, and respond. And you can hear in that there's still that stage where you're going to ask a question, but it's customized. It's broader than trafficking. It's for assessing all forms of abuse that our patients may experience. And it's customized to that individual and is empowerment focused. So the goal is not to rescue or to force a disclosure, but to really create a conversation and to empower that person with information so that if and when they're ready to disclose or to get out of the situation, they know what resources they have. So again, the goal is not disclosure. The goal is not rescue. It's to open that door and empower them with education and resources. And so I usually, for those patients that leave the emergency department, which is most of them, I make sure that they know about the National Human Trafficking Hotline number that we have in the United States. And there are many similar hotlines around the globe so that they have that kind of lifeline. Many of them know that their trafficker is going through their belongings. And so it's not safe for them to have it, written down even in their shoe. Some of them might label it in their phone under some other name. We're advocating that all health systems have a plan in place. So it's great to have these national hotlines to be able to refer individuals to, but really in your communities, starting those conversations and in your hospitals and hospital systems to make sure that you know what resources exist in the community and where you'll be referring to. We have a great resource on the HEAL website called the HEAL Protocol Toolkit, which was a collaboration with Hope for Justice. And it's being used in 26 countries around the globe to help build protocols in hospitals and clinics and community health centers so that when that disclosure does happen, that there's not this panic and what do we do next? Along with respecting and responding and thinking about the categories of resources we can offer, I just want to flag one really important piece, which is law enforcement involvement. So I've heard story after story of clinicians that when they first think that there's trafficking going on, that their natural instinct is to call 911 or call law enforcement immediately. And I just really want to underline the point that law enforcement involvement has its time and place, but it's really critical that that decision is made with the potential survivor, with the potential trafficked person, and that it's the right law enforcement at the right time. And just to give some examples of how this can go wrong, I mentioned earlier that trafficking victims may not disclose because of fear of deportation. There's actually a study out of New York City that showed that the number one reason why trafficked persons did not tell their doctor. So we're talking about, a trusted health professional, was that they were afraid of being deported. And so whether or not that is a real or perceived threat, depending on where you're clinically practicing, just to know that that fear is very loud and clear for many of our foreign national patients, even those with documentation. And so you can see how mentioning law enforcement as a resource to that individual may just kind of close the door and they may not share anything else. And you really want to make sure that you're able to connect them with the other housing and legal resources that they may be interested in. So that's one way that things can go sideways. And many trafficking victims are forced to commit crimes as part of their exploitation. And so they may fear being arrested, and if you call the wrong law enforcement, that law enforcement may feel that it's their due diligence to actually arrest that person rather than to treat them as a victim. And so, the last thing we want to do is to close that door with a potential trafficked person, and the last thing we want for them to have happen is for them to be deported or arrested. Just being careful even about the mention of law enforcement resources, and then certainly in terms of engaging law enforcement to build those relationships ahead of time. So I just covered a lot of information here. So again, we know that the majority of trafficked persons access healthcare at some point while they're being trafficked. And the number one location is the emergency department. And for someone to be considered trafficked, there has to be an action that the trafficker is doing to them, and they may be forced, frauded, coerced into that situation for labor or for commercial sex work. And they really may present in a variety of fashions, but to think about those health related pieces that might be related to the work that they're doing, the living conditions they're in, those delayed presentations, and then those contextual clues where somebody may be extra fearful, their story may not be matching their history. They may be coming in with somebody, even if that person is, the same gender and seems to be amicable, to think about the fact that could even be another potentially trafficked person. And then whenever you're thinking about assessment for trafficked persons, to really think about setting up those right conditions that allow for disclosure and safety, emotional safety, but that the goal is not disclosure or rescue. And so that's the PAIR tool: privacy, educate, ask, respect, and respond. And then ultimately to make sure that you have a plan in place, that you have those policies and procedures in place. And again, the HEAL Trafficking Protocol Toolkit is an excellent resource in setting that up. And I encourage all of you to join the HEAL Trafficking Network. It's free to sign up for our listserv, where we are always sharing the latest evidence related to health and trafficking intersections. And our website has a compendium of resources, including medical literature, example protocols from around the globe, webinars for health professionals to really dive in deep on specific topics like trauma-informed care. Thank you again for the opportunity to share this information with you all today. And I look forward to having you join HEAL and look forward to future conversations. Thank you.